Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bharti and welcome to TFiR Insights, a show where we deep dive into cloud native technologies. And today we have with us Avi Press, CEO and co-founder of Scarf. Avi, first of all, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You are the creator of this company. So first of all, I want to know quickly about your own background and then why you created the company. And this is elevator pitch to explain it to me very quickly.
So I'm a software engineer by background and have built various developer tools like for previous employers or just things in my spare time, kind of all for fun. And some of those open source projects got to the point where like my company, my employer was, relying on these tools very heavily, like in our build or in our developer pipelines and workflows. And so I open sourced some of those tools so, other people could use them. And some of those tools took off to the point where I had like a thriving open source project and was just hooked on open source from that moment of seeing people from all around the world contributing and using the projects, and that's just such a great feeling. But fast forward a little bit, I'm in the situation where there's people who are using my tools at big companies, and they have really lofty expectations for the support that I would provide on those tools, the turnaround of bug fixes and those kinds of things. And I was in a position of just being always so reactive to my issues in GitHub and always feeling, very behind as a maintainer to make sure that my users, especially the commercial users, are really well supported. And I was just in a position of, really wanting to better understand how my open source tools were being used and, where in the world and what features are being used, et cetera, but not having the visibility into my own software distribution to actually make that happen, and wanting to provide really good support for my commercial users, but not having the tools to make that happen either. And so being in the situation of being a maintainer of a successful open source project and the difficulties that I faced there is what got me started working on Scarf. And so Scarf, the company, is really all about helping open source developers and projects better understand how their software is being used, connect with their users, especially the commercial users, and provide the best software they can.
Right. This is a problem for open source because by you, I mean open source developers, unlike proprietary software where you log into a particular system and then download it. So you do know with open source, first of all, anybody can be downloading from the repository and people can clone your repository. They can also create, not essentially forks, but derivatives. And there are so many ways they can repackage your software. So it does become a challenge. So first of all, I want to understand from you, if you look at companies like Canonical, they implemented, in Ubuntu itself, and then a lot of users, they got upset with it. Somehow desktop users, they get upset about almost everything. So there are some means, but first of all, I want to know from you is, what is the importance of knowing who is using your tool and collecting some telemetry data to actually help users in, it could be bug fixing, it could be performance improvement. People don't understand the importance of these things. So talk about the importance of having visibility into who is using your software and how they're using it.
Yeah, if you think about, like, if you're working on, an application, app, website, whatever at a company, you would never push code to production without understanding how that code was being run. Like, it would be reckless to do so. Yet, banks, hospitals, all that stuff are like really important, foundations of society are all relying on software, where the people who build that software have no idea how that software is being used, if stuff is going wrong, all these things. And the only way that maintainers actually find out about issues is when people report them on GitHub. And by then, damage often has already been done. And so in an open source project, to just have a decent understanding of the really basic aspects of your project, like how many people are actually using it every month, and what versions are being used. I think a lot of developers that use Scarf are really surprised by how slow their users are to upgrade to new versions, even if really critical bug fixes are pushed out. Just knowing, like, what platforms they're on, where in the world are they, like what language might you want to translate your README into, and these sorts of things. A ton of really basic things are unlocked just by understanding the basics of how your software is being used. And that the effects of that are really, really wide. If maintainers are well informed, they can deliver better software, just period. And that's something that pretty much every other domain of software is already taken for granted at this point. But for a lot of historical reasons, open source has yet to catch up with that line of thinking. And we're going to just continually see more and more problems and maintainer burnout and these kinds of things if they're continually forced into this reactive cycle. I know for me personally, it got to the point where anytime my GitHub issues would go off, like my heart would skip a beat, like, oh, I hope I didn't like horribly mess something up this time. And I was just really hoping that I could get out from that reactive nature and be a little bit more proactive with how I maintain my work.
One more thing is that security is becoming very important. It used to be someone else's problem, but now it is kind of becoming part of developers' workflow pipeline. CI/CD or CD is also continuous delivery is also becoming very, very important in today's world. So the way we write code and then the way we deploy code is also becoming kind of critical piece of the whole puzzle. We also talk about software reliability or site reliability. So there's a lot of kind of evolution going on from developers to DevOps to SREs. So talk about why do you think that the visibility, you explained the why part already, that why developers should have access to it or they should have this approach. But in this changing time, especially in the cloud native world or DevOps centric world, what is the importance not only for developers, but also end users? You did give examples of banks, sometimes they're running, but let's look at it from security perspective as well. Because security means disruption in business continuity. That thing may happen only once, but when it happens, it's a big challenge for a company. So talk about the importance from business aspect, not just developers pipeline aspect.
So, I mean, one reason why businesses should care about this is you're depending on you have a lot of external dependencies in any given project. And those open source dependencies, they're not maintained by your company. The health of those projects is very important for your own security. If there's a vulnerability in a library that you depend on, you definitely, want the maintainer to know about it. Ideally, they know about it before you do, and ideally, they fix it before you do. But if the state of the art for how maintainers can collect that information is with a survey, which is, for a lot of projects, how that gets done, that's not a good model for this. And maintainers, being some of the most technologically sophisticated people on the planet, should have better tools for how they get this kind of information. And I think the other piece of this too is to think about the package registries and the relationship that companies have with the registries from which they fetch their dependencies. Especially when you see things like Docker with the recent rate limits that they applied, like. You could have just started silently hitting those rate limits, and suddenly you can't pull down containers anymore unless you start paying Docker money, which is fine. Docker, it's expensive to keep those services running, and you get what you pay for. But being actually in the loop about how the registry is behaving, the security implications of the registry, is something that's very important as well, and that's something that. Really ties into the security surface area that your business has. The dependencies that you pull in are just as important as the rest, because you're building right on top of it. And so keeping those things as secure as possible and making sure the people who are building that software are in the loop is just going to become more and more crucial over time. So it's something that it affects businesses. Really, whether you're a maintainer or a consumer of open source, this stuff is going to become increasingly more important over time.
Now, so far, we have talked about the problem area. We have talked about what should be done. I want to understand, when we look at Scarf, the company, what are your offering? How are you helping developers with all these problems that we're talking about?
So the main idea with Scarf is that we're trying to help projects better understand their software distribution and have more control over their software distribution. So the main product that we're really excited to be launching is called the Scarf Gateway. And the idea is that it's a central access point to your containers and your packages independently of where those containers may be hosted. So it's a thin layer that sits in front of your registry. So say you host your containers on Docker Hub. The Scarf Gateway makes it really easy to host those containers through your own domain rather than pointing your users directly at Docker Hub. And this is really powerful and important for a few different reasons. So one of them is that it decouples you from your registry. You're able to switch registries seamlessly because the actual access point that your users pull containers from or packages stays static. So moving forward, if one registry is compromised or it goes down, or you just want to switch to another one, Scarf Gateway users can seamlessly switch over without introducing a breaking change for their users. So it improves the long-term reliability of that distribution channel. And then the other effect here is that because the Scarf Gateway is the first thing that gets hit when people go to pull down your package or your container, we can surface all of the insights of that traffic to the maintainers. So, what versions of the software are being downloaded? Where in the world are those downloads coming from? What companies are pulling down the software? And all these sorts of things downstream that are really helpful for maintaining a viable open source project that the registries actually had the whole time. Like the data that we're exposing to maintainers could have been exposed to them way, long ago. But the unfortunate thing was the registries just never really had an incentive to do that. And so where Scarf is sitting, we are aligning ourselves with the interests of the maintainers such that we can help them have more control and ownership of the distribution of their software, get better insights and understand how that software is used. And so we can help connect them with their commercial users, ideally in ways that help financially support the project and keep them in the loop so that they can just deliver the best software they can to their users. So really, you can think of Scarf as just a set of tools, a tool chain that can help you distribute your software with better observability and more reliability and more ownership of that distribution channel.
Avi, thank you so much for talking about not only but this is a really serious challenge, because if you don't have visibility into who is using your software, how they're using it, you cannot address a lot of problems, whether it's related to security, whether it's related to performance, whether it's related to compliance. So thanks for talking about those aspects and also getting a bit deeper into what the company is all about. So thanks for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.